All right, all. For those of you watching this process video, it's actually using the oblique view from 131's assignment project, or project 3 assignment, where we're using a photo montage, stitching in a model photograph into a site photograph. So in this oblique view, I'm looking across from the third floor roof of Building 5 across back at the elevator tower shaft there, right, with the roof of the fourth floor and its two scuppers and the two columns that sort of frame the entry to our site. So what I have done is I've used a model from Project 2 and went ahead and scaled it, like basically as if we were using a cube exercise, but scaling up to the scale of the body. And I'm going to double check here to see how close my verticals are, which in this model it's pretty close. I think the verticals are pretty comfortably aligned. In that way, I've got a 30-foot by 30-foot square is what I'm describing, and 30-foot tall. So it's different than the constraints of your particular site, but it's good enough for this kind of process video. So the first thing I'm going to do, much like the tutorial I have in the abstract about cutting out, I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to use my polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to cut away everything. And since I know I'm going to be tucked into the site base, I won't worry about the shadow. But I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and cut away everything that isn't the model. And so as I use my polygonal lasso tool, and again, this is, although this was not the intended part of this assignment, in Project 2 we stayed at 1 inch equals 1 inch. The fact that you can scale things has become quite apparent, I'm sure, in folks in your career so far. And where we are in class right now is other people are actually working on their specific model photographs, but I felt like this would be a good time to kind of walk through a technique of then stitching without even a site model base. And as I go around and trace the frame and plane logic from this Project 2 model, you can start to see that I can borrow a lot of vertical straight lines. This project has some angles built into it, so it's a little bit hard to see until as you're zooming in what should be straight up and down and what's canted, but the author of the model itself themselves would actually know what they want to achieve. So I go around here, and again, since I'm not dealing with a ground in the photograph, a lot of this stuff actually won't be here. You'll also see that I put in a scale figure, which is a helpful tool and other heights when you're matching things to a photograph. In this scale figure, standing on the ground, again, just due to the nature of the perspective, and the wall of the site actually won't be seen below the waist. And again, this piece of plane has a slight bend to it, which is something, the nature of developing craft, and then happen here. So if I select inverse now that I've selected the outside, select inverse, I now have this model ready for cutting and pasting in to the site. So Command A, Command C, and then Command V. And here I am pasting it into the site photo. So depending on the size of your own photo, things show up a little differently here, right, in that way. So we can start to align edges. I know that this corner, right, by the nature of what I scaled here, this corner is going to be right at that edge here. I also know that the way that this is set up in terms of a frame, that this corner should be back here, And so remember what we said before, this is not the same constraints as your guys' project. A little bit of a difference in the sort of the view. Or you can see where I'm getting pretty close to the back edge of that wall. And now from here I can do Command T, and I can start to distort the image itself. I want to put this thing on the ground. Also, the really incredible thing about the geometry of even this control joints, right, of Building 5 is that they're also that is the floor line, that score joint, right? So that it gives me the ability to kind of, again, more than roughly locate where that edge is. And then you see here I'm actually going off the frame of the image, just due to the nature, again, of the size of this piece, but we can play with that a little bit. So as I start to think about this here, I can play with layer opacity even, right, to sort of make a little x-ray for a minute to sort of double check heights and things. So this is that corner of the wall back here. And as you can see, I'm not seeing much below the ground there. This is a little bit off in terms of its perspective. So again, you can start to play with a slight warping in the piece, right? So I can start to bring this down this way. Or if I go into Distort tool, come down, bringing this down. Roughly that height there. And now that I have this, I can now come back up. And again, I'm pretty close to that back wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to cut away the rest of the remaining parts of the model background. So this was in the photography background. And I was talking to folks in studio, if you hit Command or Control plus and minus, even within a command, that allows you to zoom in while still staying active, which is really nice to have that ability to zoom in for a precise cut. Line and logic. As I go along here. Again. So I got a little bit. Piece of that here. And then this angled plane here. And then again, you can see where I'm going around, cutting out. There's another scale figure. This project took some liberties here and put a preschooler scale. So here's a 36-inch scale figure that's on the top of the floor here. And as you start to think about the windows into the project, now you're starting to get more context because of the openness. Really nicely done use of frame and plane, a lot of white space, negative space in these models from Project 2. Really allows for that porosity. As we zoom out here in a second, we'll be able to see just how much that helped kind of embed the project in the site. Again, I still haven't cut away the base of the model yet, which is something I have. It's nice to have a live group of people in here, so for the folks in the room right now, I'll ask you guys to look up in just a second after I've cut this away to make sure that this tracks in terms of how you would cut away elements that are cropped by other pieces of the model. So unlike my tutorial video about the backyard bunkhouse, there are things in the way of you viewing your entire project, namely the parapet wall is at 3 foot 6 inches tall, as we know from our site measurements. So with that other piece, you'll see this model will seem very out of place and floating, almost, or you should say pasted on top of the base image instead of part. So I'm going to now take care of this scale figure, cut around it, because this piece we will see. And for those of you not in my studio, if you happen to be watching this, this is actually a scale figure that I made with my students back in 2016. We did some scanning using an Xbox 360 Kinect. And it allowed you to do a full body sort of scan and create a file that was then usable to then 3D print and put in as scale figures. Okay. Cutting out the last bit. And again, some of these things I'm actually cutting out. I know I'm going to be deleting, but I'd rather not do that without you guys seeing those. And if you had a cardboard element that you've nested in for context, certain things will become apparent because your cardboard would tell you where the parapet wall is in your model as well. And you can cut around it. But this is also a way, I think, to show you the various tools you can... Oh, sorry, that was the double click on my end. Go back and re-click this one. Just to repeat one more time, if you are watching this, this project is basically double the height that you were allowed. Okay, looks like I have one more window, so that's because I just scaled a Project 2 model to not take the work and process away from someone in particular. But scaling it now. So folks that are in the room, if you wouldn't mind just looking up, this is the last thing I was going to show on the video. I've got this roughly, 26 feet or so. I said 30 by 30, but 26 foot element here. I've cut away all the pieces of the model. And so now one of the things I can play with is through the nature of we said the toddler up there, right, on this level, this 3 foot, isn't cropped. But over here, I'm going to hit this corner of inside the parapet wall in this design. I'm fenced in. I've got this square defined if I had x-ray vision, this square around its back wall. Anything in the front here is actually going to be cut away. So what I'm going to do now to really help situate this thing is I'm going to trace the front of the parapet wall. Start there first. And so I've traced the parapet wall, front face that's facing me. And in the model photograph, I've now deleted that. And then the other thing I have to do is and I could have zoomed in and done this more, but I just want to show you, that was the face. I also need to do, there's a slight thickness to the wall, as we know in this photo. It's a considerable thickness when you're up there. But that's why I won't seem decapitated, or cut off at the waist here. I'll actually seem like I'm actually part of the scale figure here. So I'm just going across. And it looks like I just slightly off with my piece here. Yes. Yeah, so okay, so Donna's asking in the room, right, so as you guys go through, does that track with everybody? And Donna's, but does that see how I cut out this model base here? So you wouldn't see me from my waist down, but it looks like I'm a part of the terrace, right? It looks like I'm sort of in. This piece nests in, it sits in the corner. Here's this two-story element. And if you were to guess, right, and yeah, Donna, we'll get to your question for sure, because that's a really good point. If you were to guess, that's not far off the cubeness of it. It might be a little bit shy here. So to Donna's point, right, when you do Command or Control T, this brings up Transform. At any point, you can right-click in Transform, and you have, first things first is Free Transform, okay? And that's just going to move it up and down, things like that, right? So if I do this, it moves the whole thing up. If I do this, it stretches it out by this corner, right? So it's actually using which points it pinches from. But if I go into Distort, Distort allows me to actually warp things up, down. I can create different vanishing conditions, right? If I'm slightly off, it can't observe everything. But I also have the straight up perspective tool that starts to deform in a particular shape. But that right-click tool, often you end up using rotate, distort and perspective are probably the two that come up the most in terms of the final model tweaks. But as long as everybody in the room feels comfortable with this process, did that go okay in terms of that last bit you guys watched? Did anybody, when I was doing that cutaway of Scale Brian, did that jump a step too far? Okay, so we'll call this process video done. I'll share this online for anybody who's interested to look back through. But that's a way to sort of nest a model, nest a model into the space. Oh, and I realized, I'm sorry guys, one thing that might have jumped out to you. There's a huge piece I missed because it matched the sky. This model has a wide open panel, so I apologize. This will make it stitch even more in the shot. It was blocking the... Yeah, you guys will probably laugh. There's bishops. That's a pretty important thing that I was just blocking there. So there we go. That's actually the finished product of a sort of stitched cube model frame, plane, and I'm looking through to see bishops with the piece sitting on the terrace. And I think that'll do.